So, welcome to Zahara's book launch. Zahara, who's quite camera shy and hates talking about herself, we're going to make her talk about herself and her book for the next hour. And tonight it's a bit of a love fest, all about the brilliant work that Zahara has been doing. I'm Hannah, I'm your host. So, I'm the founder and director of The Belonging Effect. And here she is. Here is Zahara, the author, the woman of the moment. Do you want to say hello to everyone, Zahara?
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
We appreciate you and the work you've done. So, a little bit of an agenda so we know what we are doing and what order. Sahara's going to share a little bit about what brought her, like work-wise, to doing this book, writing this book. Then we're going to hear from Holly, who is the editor from the publishing house, who supported the book coming to fruition. And then we've got a panel of different people who have supported and influenced Sahara on her journey as an educator, a DIB lead, and becoming a published author. And then lots of opportunities also for a bit of a Q&A for people to be able to ask questions. Got more people arriving, so there are a few more people in. So, Sahara, why don't we start with you? Why don't you tell everyone where the idea for the book came from, how you got to the point of penning a book, let me just remind you, while she was also having her third child. So birthing her third child and birthing a book on mat leave. I think that deserves a round of applause, doesn't it? I think that's a pretty big achievement, Zahara. So over to you. Share your story about how you came to write the book.
Thank you. And then, as Holly knows, I think I was pretty much having contractions while I was finishing the edits of writing the book. So no, I've been teaching for over a decade, and I'd say in terms of what brought me to writing the book is that I've taught predominantly in schools, which I guess we regard as have with minoritized identities. And I always feel that those students were always underestimated. And my own experiences at school were that people like me were also underestimated. And by that, what I mean is like our academic progression, just the way we were seen and heard was always sort of shoeboxed and always misunderstood in many ways. And what would happen is in the classroom when I started teaching, I taught at the school that I would say that this book is effectively dedicated to this predominantly, and I have that as my dedication at the beginning, is though those students effectively taught me what belonging was in the classroom, and they helped me feel like I belong. I would say I've never felt more confident or just seen and heard and valued in that anywhere else apart from in those classrooms. And those students taught me so much about what it means to, yes, be academic, like do what school is there to do in its most primary form, which is to effectively get students through. I'm secondary, so get students through their GCSE and A levels and take them to their next steps. But those students also taught me so much more about them and how to have like difficult conversations with them, like the conversations that would always spill over into break time and lunchtime. And I think I have to say, one of the first conversations was really around when I really sort of let my guard down with the students. And I can't remember if it was with Aaron, who will introduce himself later, but it was with a class where they asked me what my favorite Instagram filter was, and I answered really honestly. And I know it's such a small. I just remember that conversation so vividly because everybody burst out laughing. We all just like it really broke down really like simple barriers that clearly were up, and we had the most wonderful conversations, and then when those students would face challenges in and around school, sometimes with other teachers, sometimes in their personal lives, I they would many of them would come to me to talk about them. And I don't know whether it was because they felt that I would understand, maybe because we shared a similar identity, that I represented in some respects. But I remember one particular presentation and assembly around the lack of representation of South Asian female women in sport. And I also qualified as a personal trainer when I was teaching, and fitness and was one of like my stress relievers. And I remember a year 10 student coming up to me afterwards when I was talking about South Asian representation in sport and saying, "Miss, you just get it." And that was a real like eye opener, because I realized that to get them academically to where they needed to be, I didn't need to just see them as grades on chairs. Like I saw them for who they are, and we would have fun conversations, difficult conversations. We faced some pretty like conflicting challenges in the classroom together. And yeah, that's what sort of led to writing the book.
So are you finishing there for me to hand over to your
Yes.
editor and publisher? Thank you, Zahara. So let's bounce over to Holly, who helped Zahara birth the book. Maybe you're the midwife, Holly, of the book that she birthed.
I wish. Um, well, I have to say, Zahara did most of this on her own. When I came to the project, which has been just such an honour to work on, it was pretty much fully formed. And I think that's testament to kind of Zahara's experience and her kind of thoughtfulness, in that there really wasn't that much that needed to be done to kind of get this ready for the world to see. It's a hugely considered, practical, kind of actionable guidebook, but really has that kind of trademark Zahara warmth and empathy, which I think is really evidenced by the fact that so many pupils come to her for help and advice, and now teachers can as well. And you know, from a Bloomsbury's point of view, we're really keen to kind of help shape the conversation as well as kind of react to trends and kind of curriculum changes. And it's becoming increasingly clear to everybody that belonging is an essential part of learning and well-being. And again, Zahara's book really stood out for us. Just it's so authentic, and it gives very practical tools that will make sure every student genuinely feels seen, and valued. Again, think that whole school lens is something that's been missing from this piece at the moment as well. There are a lot of other excellent resources and books out there, but this book really tackles everything from psychological safety, curriculum reform, to empowering the teachers. This is something that teachers crave and want to talk about and have noticed the need for. And something this book does brilliantly is set teachers up to succeed on a human level as well as on a very kind of systemic, practical level. It handholds them through all of these brave and difficult conversations. It reassures them that it's okay not to know all the answers to these questions, and really guides them, for want of a better word, on this journey to kind of understanding each other, and having that conversation, making it a dynamic rather than a teacher just talking at students, which I think is so often the case on difficult topics. They get shut down, or they feel blindsided and don't really know where to start. This book really genuinely helps change that perspective.
What lovely feedback and affirmation, Sarah. I actually was glad to see you smile at the feedback and to take that.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Holly. I think you should have done the intro for the book. You know, when you talk and you're like, oh my God, I didn't say anything I should have. Thanks, Holly. That was brilliant.
Quick question: how did you find your publisher, or how did your publisher find you? Because I think that's always a question that people ask.
Joanna at Bloomsbury sent me an email, and I was like, "Wow, Bloomsbury have found me!" Like that's like a real. In any teacher knows that if Bloomsbury ends up in your inbox, you're like, "Oh my God, that's amazing!" And she actually came to me to review. I think it was another book, and then asked. We had a bit of a conversation of if I had any ideas, and it was such a like amazing process, because I went through it like doing the sort of commission and putting my proposal together, sending it across, thinking nothing is ever going to come of this. And I shouldn't tell Rachel this, who's my ex boss. There were times where I was doing it whilst at work. Not during lessons though, just so you know. And then I got the email through to say your proposal's been accepted, and I was there going, that's ridiculous, that's like no way has it. And that's how it, like, Joanna landed in my inbox. That it was around, it was, I think it was a January, a few years ago now, three years ago. Yeah.
I should probably jump in really quickly at that point to say we're always open to submissions as well. There is a bit on our website. We're really keen to kind of, I know everybody says this, but we're genuinely keen to kind of diversify our reach, have as many authors from as many backgrounds as possible. You don't need to have written before. That's what I'm for. So please do, if you have an idea or a passion, have a look at the website and just submit something because you never know.
Lovely. Great invitation. Thank you, Holly. Shall we move to the panel then, Sahara? Do you want to
Yeah,
introduce your lovely panel?
yeah, I'd love to. So we're joined by very kindly by Rachel, Aaron, Simon, and Holly. Adam, unfortunately, is unable to be here today due to personal circumstances. But thank you so much for everyone else who is here to have a short conversation, really, for the next like 20 to 25 minutes about belonging in the classroom. I can introduce. I'd quite like, if okay, for the speakers to introduce themselves. So. Rachel, if I can come to you first, because I know Rachel hates this kind of thing. So, Rachel, could you please share who you are and how amazing you are?
Oh yeah, no problem whatsoever. Yeah, so I'm Rachel Smith. I've worked with Zahara for um, almost the whole of her teaching career. And I was lucky enough to be a deputy head when she was working at one school. And then when I went on to be the head teacher, I poached her and she came to me. She does herself down all the time in terms of all the things, the podcast, the school should be, the web stuff, all the other things that she does that helps create it. It wasn't just discussions in classrooms. Um, but Zahara has always had a great deal of power in her belief. I've always desperately wanted to work with people who are determined to take an idea and run with it. And so we really worked well together. I was the first school, I think, in Buckinghamshire to create a DEI role and wrote the job description. It was subsequently taken by a number of other schools and developed and whatever. But it was Zahara and I would say, where we began. To come into a school and ask the hard questions. And I can't say that it was easy, and it didn't always make me the most loved head teacher in the world by staff or by students. But what it did is it made me more and more determined that a, from one space to another, not worrying about whether or not Ofsted came in, but actually whether or not the children and the staff, learners, because it's not just about children, that everybody had a word and a space to say those words. And that's where I began before actually I ended up stopping work because it was just incredibly difficult. But we had a couple of years, didn't we? Well, before Sahara decided to have another baby, most inconvenient. Otherwise, I think we would have gone on and conquered the world together. So I am very lucky to have worked with her.
There's still time, Rachel.
More babies.
Aaron, I'm so glad you're here, Aaron. Aaron, do you want to? So, just a caveat before Aaron introduces himself. I taught Aaron from when he was in year 8, I want to say. Year
Hmm.
8.
Yeah.
Yeah. But thank you so much for joining, Aaron. I'm so glad you're here.
This is very heartfelt because not only did you teach me, but Rachel Smith was also my deputy head. So it's a real blast from the past in a really affirming way because often when you're going through school and you think about the teachers that made an impact, you don't usually you think, oh, I would love to like have them as a mentor or something in my life one day. And I actually got to, so I feel very fortunate for that. Yeah, it's so interesting to me being here because I think even just not saying your surname and saying Zahara feels so cool. But I feel like really getting to see you on your journey and evolve from seeing you as my teacher and all the things that you've done from that. And having you from that lens and just I feel like you've just kept growing and evolved and I knew you were amazing when you opened up a conversation and a dialogue, and again made me feel seen in a way. I can attest to all the things you said because I experienced it. Um, and it really it had such an impact on me because I think when you're going through school and you're navigating so many things, and me, I think being quite a deeper thinker and a thoughtful person, there's a lot of times where you don't know where that goes. And so in a way, when someone turns around and says, "Oh no, all those questions are valid and you can ask even more," it was such a dynamic shift for me. And yeah, it was an incredible support. And there's obviously so many things we can go into, but I can say I can't say more enough like how important this conversation is, and because I've had the impact of it. So
Oh,
yeah.
thank you, Aaron. And just like Aaron, what you did, because you like Aaron was such an exceptional student. Like I still remember in year eight, I think you had like a school trip on a Thursday, and you came to me, and you came to me on a Tuesday to hand in your homework to the English office, and I was like, that. How? Like it's just exceptional in so many ways. So, Aaron, what are you doing now? If that's okay to.
Yeah, I actually do a mix of things. So interestingly enough, I do workshops at schools and universities too, where I talk about mindfulness and well-being and deep reflection. I also work as like a fashion writer for a magazine and a bunch of other projects. I have like a fashion and a thoughtful blog as well. So a lot of things always happening over here.
That's amazing. And Simon, I think so. I can't see Simon on my screen.
I'm here.
Yes.
I'm still here. Good of a plug. Thanks, Zahara. Yeah, it's really a pleasure to be here. As I've sort of known Zahara now, I think it's not 3 years, is it, Zahara?
Yeah.
I won't talk too long because we want to get on to the book. But basically, I got to know Zahara at the Buckinghamshire New University, where I worked for 17 years. That's a long time. Sort of leading an academic and learning development team. I had responsibility for sort of decolonizing the curriculum as I led on a definition for Islamophobia, which was adopted by the institution, and did a lot of work with the sort of race equality network. So in a way, that's a piece of my role has very much been involved with EDI, trying to promote diversity, inclusion, etc. And now, after 17 years, I really couldn't do much more. So I sort of downsized a bit, and now I teach multicultural writing at Birmingham City University, which is much more my interest, if you like. My background is literature, which is also Zahara's background. So we've had some really interesting conversations about literature. So, but yeah, I won't talk too much about myself because I'm not. So Zahara's the star, and her book's the
Okay.
topic.
No, thank you so much. And I think I've really enjoyed working across the sector as well. Because when I went into HE and met Simon and along with other colleagues, it's really interesting how that conversation about belonging and inclusion, it kind of permeates the entire sector from mainstream to higher education. And something that I don't think we talk about enough is how important it is to work on equity and inclusion from the moment children enter childcare, for example, to after they graduate, like that entire kind of like there almost needs to be like what would you call a golden thread, like joining up all of the sectors, particularly if we want students to feel like they belong and to be successful. And that sort of, I guess that kind of this next segment is few questions, a little bit like the School Should Be podcast, so a bit of a taster to the podcast, if you haven't listened into it. But the first question I have, I kind of want to ask Rachel and Simon to begin with is considering your experiences in teaching, so Rachel in mainstream, Simon in HE, what would you say have been some of the key changes in teaching students, so young students as well as students in university over the past 5 to 10 years? Rachel, if I could start with you.
Yes, of course. It was interesting thinking back, actually. I think, let's go back 10 years, sort of 2015 time. I think that students were at that time beginning to explore identities. They were more open discussions about race and gender, neurodiversity and mental health, but they were small. The curriculum and the school culture was still really about assimilation and fitting in rather than being seen. And there wasn't the the computers, the digital literacy, or the AI revolution that actually opened up the world to people. So they were still, even in sort of 10 years ago, I think students were still more reliant on the things they were told, and they didn't see the whole world as much as they do now. Would you say, Simon, that that would be a similar thing in HE?
You really just said everything I wanted to say.
Sorry.
But yeah, certainly the way we interact with students, the belonging, the classroom no longer exists just in real space. The classroom exists in virtual space as well, and sometimes you have to simultaneously trying to sort of work with students. Some are engaging online, others are engaging in sort of into the real world space. So that's how do you create the very practical issues around how you create belonging just with the technology and the sort of positioning within space. And then you're right, the different types of literacies that have emerged around emotional literacy, racial literacy, gender literacy, sexual literacies, expectations around that. I think students expect and demand more from us about their own particular sense of self, which in the past they would have been more reticent about, and we might not, I think it become much more centralized to their experience and expectations that we engage with that at every level, both in terms of how we run a session, how we organize groups, the materials that we choose, and obviously, especially say around, certainly in HE, what the number of students that now receive what we would call reasonable adjustments as part of the educational package. And in the past, it was something that seemed very optional, discretionary. And now there's a sort of real sense that the sort of staff member needs to be proactive in finding out. So you're almost sort of, when you're going into teach now, that's perhaps foremost beyond even the subject you're teaching is what particular needs do my students have around what adaptations do I need to make in order that I can get the sort of this all the students in the group to feel some sense of belonging. I want to come back to that whole concept, that name and that word belonging, because I think that itself is problematic. But yeah, so I think I've just kind of amplified, I think, what you've said, Rachel, about technology and literacies, and also the increasing diversity of students as well. They're coming, I think, the sort of newer generations, that demographic shift. You notice it. The younger you go, the greater that shift. I think that's the way demographic shifts happen. They happen with the young people.
Now touche now, because you've just taken what I was going to say. But it's very true. I think that the whole thing nowadays is about identity is central to everyone, whether it's talking as an ex-head teacher. It's also about the staff, the identity of the staff. I spent many hours trying to get people to stay, and Zahara's book, the sense of belonging. Whenever I was reading, I read it book cover to cover from the moment I sat down until I finished it. And it's very much, all of these stories are about, but how does it feel also to be a global citizen as a teacher, as opposed to a global citizen as a student? And I think you're right, that identities and the representation and the global awareness and all the activism, which is now very much part of the world of teaching, is almost more important than the information that we're sending to the children, because they can pick that up themselves virtually. It's now about helping them become the person that they want to be. So they're not only belonging in the classroom, but they're going forward and belonging in the world, in their world, and hopefully a better world when they can see the mistakes that people like me in what am I, Gen X or Gen Dinosaur, that we've made mistakes, and the new people coming through, when they have a sense of who they are, will be able to stand up and say, no, that's not right. And I think that is the most exciting thing about what's changed in classrooms now. But it's also the scariest thing for the older generation of teachers and leaders who are used to people saying, yes, I'll do what I'm told. Not, but why? Why should I? Why can't I do that instead? That's the changes for me, I think.
Thank you, Rachel. And I just want to come to you, Aaron, because obviously, like Simon and Rachel, and even me, we're talking more from the perspective of teachers. And the book is very much inspired by conversations with you, with students like you. And then when I was writing the book, I went to different schools and I asked students of elements like what do they think belonging is, like when do they feel like they belong in the classroom? And like Simon said, it problematic word is a fully loaded word as well. But from your experience as a student, what does or did belonging mean to you, particularly as someone who went from mainstream and then, you went to university, you were at uni, was it during COVID as well? Was that,
Yeah.
yeah. So you were
Hmm.
you were that year that went into those years that went into lockdown as well, where there was a lot of focus on like well-being, student well-being and identity. That's when the conversations really started, and that's when I start I got the job, like in terms of leading EDI post COVID. So what from your perspective, when you reflect and think back, what does belonging mean to you as a student, or when do you feel like you belong in a classroom?
Good question. It's interesting actually, because in a sad way, I think it's when you come from not belonging that it makes you question more or remember the moments when you did feel it. I'll say from my experience, so I was the head boy at the school I was from, and it was something I'd always envisioned. Like I always wanted that role. Like coming into year seven, I just felt like I really wanted to make that impact. And I think I'm always someone that's been really passionate about mental health. So I thought that was something that I would really be able to kind of push forward and bring something fresh into taking that role. And when I did, it was such a juxtaposition because in my final year of school, I dealt with depression, but then here I was, almost the prototype of like what a perfect student should be. And I would sometimes be giving these speeches in front of hundreds of parents and saying these things, and I felt the exact opposite from. And I was almost fighting the words out of my mouth sometimes. And I remember I think I had to do a lot of things where I would show parents around the school. So like prospective students that came in, and I was just like, I'm gonna give these parents or these kids the information that I wish I knew, like a more well-rounded view or like information that I wish I had had. And the parents just didn't care. I remember it was all so grade focused, and I was like, okay, yeah, yeah, we can have that conversation. But then there's this, and I could see the parent shut down, which in a way made the kids also shut down to that conversation. And you're just hoping that you can get through, because I know when you start having those thoughts, how isolating it can be when sometimes you feel like you're the only one.
Mm.
And so in university too is an interesting thing where you think sometimes it's going to be a wider level of thought and the different diverse voices, but then you can almost get so lost in it because it's so big that you went from feeling like you had such a voice and now you don't even know where to place it. But I
Mm.
will say, when I do think of belonging in the classroom and my experiences of it, it was definitely like for me, I come alive in conversation, and I loved like whenever we were in English and we could just delve into a character or a story, but then those would turn into big topics of those big themes, and then we would relate it back to real things in life. And I think sometimes education can feel so isolated. So when you related it back to real things that in a way, you're talking about a character from maybe 100 years ago, and those experience, you never translate that as a student, how that actually connects to you. But then when you have conversations of those broader themes, you see those connections.
Mm.
Um, and I think the importance I think you especially taught was having a voice. I think sometimes in school it can be so lost. Like I think I remember you saying to me at one point, you're like, yeah, you can think differently to me, or you can have an independence of thought here. And I was like, whoa, what? Can I? Because it's sometimes it's really hard to remember that. And I think exactly what Rachel Smith was saying before too, of I've been in many situations now in terms of like job world. in terms of like where I've had to stand up for myself or I hadn't thought something's right.
Mm.
And it is very challenging. And I think if I didn't have those moments of it's something when I reflect on my own education journey too, I think so often students never think to question who they are.
Mm.
And I've really found that even in terms of like making friends or connections. And then when I saw it happen to so many of my peers, they come outside of that and they just almost crumble because you can think about what you're doing for so long, but inevitably life will catch up on you and you have to ask those bigger questions.
Mm.
And so, luckily, having those spaces where I was building that, even though it makes life difficult sometimes, it also, yeah, makes me stand up in a way that I think is really important.
Thank you, Aaron. That's so like it's so important because I think when I and maybe Holly can come in here as well because when I was writing the book, when I first started writing it, the original proposal was to write about belonging and uncomfortable conversations, but for each chapter to almost focus on a protected characteristic. So almost to have a chapter on race in schools, to have a chapter on gender, sexuality, and I found it when I started writing the book, and I was thinking about my own teaching experiences and the things that lots of young people had been telling me. I was really struggling to separate identity. Like
Mm,
I couldn't write a chapter like, and I know this is perhaps like, and obviously like you said, I'm more people disagree all the time, like not everybody's going to think about belonging and identity in the same way, but I found it very difficult to write about, especially because the book is for teachers, to write a chapter on how to have conversations about race with global majority children or students from minoritized ethnic backgrounds, whichever terminology a school uses. Because I was thinking very much like what you said, you used the word, if I could, like well-being, depression, your experiences as a head boy. In my mind, those are universal concepts. Like depression has an impact on a student or someone with what we'd call like an intersectional identity. So in the end, it came about that when I spoke to Holly, I couldn't write a chapter just on I just couldn't. I could perhaps do a whole book potentially because then the subject would, like, the subject matter would be different, but to write about belonging and uncomfortable conversations in silos was just too tricky. Holly, I don't know if you wanted to say anything about on that when we talked about it, or not necessarily. It's up
Yeah,
to
I
you.
mean, that would have been super tidy, wouldn't it? That would have been very
Yeah.
neat. But I think you're right. I think from my perspective, kind of looking at the book and helping to kind of shape it, one of the key moments and shifts for me was kind of just accepting that complexity and those
Mm.
kind of intersecting identities and looking at the common themes underneath them. So, for example, mental health or loneliness or fear of being wrong, things that are kind of universal to everybody and don't kind of fit into those little compartments that we had tried to create.
Mm.
And once we kind of, I felt like once we opened up to that complexity, the book actually flowed a lot better because we weren't trying to ram things into these little labeled kind of chapters. And
Yes.
I think it does the book and the reader much more of a service to kind of take them through in a much more like organic flowing way. It brings
Mm.
them along, I think, in a way that would have been more formulaic if we'd have tried to keep with the original structure.
Yes, no, and to me, that's kind of what belonging is, like that your identity is fluid in many ways, and you want to not necessarily fit in, but like Aaron was saying, being able to express yourself for who you are, ask those challenging questions, disagree, agree, but that not necessarily fit into, like you said, very neat and tidy chapters. And I know, Simon, you wanted to talk a bit more about belonging as a concept, like from your perspective, particularly working in HE. And all the work that you've done with regards to anti-racism, leading a race equality network, developing that Islamophobia definition, which is, very specific in many ways. From your experiences and from all the work you've done, how would you, I don't know, probably a very big question, but if you can summarize it, how would you define belonging in education? And like, what is it that educators can do to create a sense of belonging in the classroom or
So
in
I won't speak too long on this. I could go on for the rest of the webinar. But I don't think I have a definition, but I'd just like to sort of say two things. I think generally there's we all kind of are very positive about belonging. I think we're all seeing it in a very sort of positively valenced way, that it's something that's a good thing. But I think, you think of different people's backgrounds and experiences and ways into higher education or ways into school, then, there can be a certain reticence about what it belong. And I was looking at the sort of the etymology of the word to belong. And actually it means to pertain to go along with, to fit in. And so that really it is a kind, it's inherent in it is a kind of assimilationist model. And I think for some people, they will, even though we might not intend it that way, we might say it's much more reciprocal. I think for perhaps some students, depending on how they position themselves, might feel an instinctive resistance to belonging that we're trying to build. So it's very important how we frame that belonging, what our expectations are, that we don't kind of coerce a belonging, or we don't approach it glibly. I think your point as well. I think around. I think it was Zahara that you said about your own sense of belonging. That how do you build students' sense of belonging? When I was an academic or a teacher, you yourself is somewhat sort of critical or questioning about what it is to belong to an educational institution. Just two points. I was at university as a student, right through from being an undergraduate right through to a PhD. I never felt I belonged. I never felt at any moment that I belonged. I had friends. I got on with people. I didn't feel totally alienated. And that also at the same time, I never really saw belonging. In fact, my whole identity as a student was by not belonging, was by resisting belonging. That's kind of how I identified myself. I was resisting this institution, which I found quite problematic in lots of regards. And I sort of think, and I don't know people, if you're building with the HE context, there are two authors, Moten and Harney, who've written this very influential book called The Undercommons. And it's a very radical way of thinking about higher education from the perspective of minoritized students and staff, and not just academics, but all the workforce within higher education. And their whole approach is that it's good to be alienated to that extent. That's how learning happens. And they have this idea of being the fugitive, so that you're the fugitive, and they see higher education as just part of a state apparatus to normalize, to assimilate, but in a nice, soft way. So I don't think we have to necessarily go to that far, but to think how some students, in all kinds of ways, whether it's acquiring the language, it's a really good study that came from East London. And it's called Talking Posh, and it's how so many students see entering higher education and sort of being successful is mastering the discourse and the literacy is learning to talk posh. And that could also be learning to talk like a middle-class white person. Effectively, that's what posh means in the UK. And so if that's kind of what is our assumption around belonging, then, we perhaps need to think a bit more critically about it. So I'd finally say that just in terms of belonging, I think we need to, when we're using that term, what do we imagine? What do we imagine when we think of belonging? How do we see a class as belonging? When we're teaching students, how do we imagine that student belonging? And are we really just imposing our own view, our own model, our own experience on that student or that class? Or are we actually really listening to the way that student might want to belong or participate? Perhaps in ways that would challenge us, become part of a difficult conversation. I don't want to belong to you. I don't like you. I'm here to get a degree and move on. Sorry,
no, that is so Rachel, do you want to come in? So
I just wanted to say that from a leadership point of view, what I liked in your book is about the audits that you put in that help us to understand what belonging is. But it's interesting that both Aaron and Simon said, well, they didn't know what belonging was. So I think what is so good about your book is that you're not saying, as Simon just said, for the people who say, well, I don't like you, I don't want to be part of your group. What I read you were saying was, let's echo what belonging might feel like, represented in the curriculum, represented in the types of language which you call what was it? Not deficit framing, but the other version, and also to create an environment where you can be who you can be, whether you're a he, she, or a they, or anything else, and you can actually feel more secure in exploring who you are. And I don't think we can force people. I totally agree with Simon. We cannot assimilate, but your book doesn't force people to do anything. What it does is it gives them a continuum that they could move through to help mirror what belonging might feel like. And if we can get some more people feeling more belonging, then that will then hopefully, the Rolling Stone and the Moss and all that lot, build that momentum. Because I think that's the biggest fear I know as a head teacher. How can I make people belong? Well, you can't. But what you can do is make it softer and easier by being brave, so that they then feel more able to step out. That's what I was desperate to say with my finger.
Yeah, no,
I
that
will, sorry, just quickly as well, just to add to that, it made me think, I'll share this anecdote quite quickly, but when I was doing this workshop, I was doing it with year 7 to 10, and each hour was like a different year. And so we would go through different exercises, and a lot at the beginning was like conversation based and a lot more with the group. And then one of the last exercises I had given them was to draw just a simple silhouette, and on the inside write words that you would use to describe yourself and how you feel about yourself, and then on the outside write words that you think other people would describe you as. And it's interesting when you are seeing all these students as a collective, you see maybe the people that are the jokesters, maybe the quieter ones, and all the different kind of stereotypes or whatever. And as I was going around, and the depth of these words that the students were putting, and some of the harsh realities some people were writing on the inside, and then vice versa, like on the outside. And you looked around, and even the kids that were the loudest in the room put such like critical and like hard things about themselves. And I really don't think you can start this conversation young enough, because, year sevens had some more depth, and in year 10s had even more, and it wasn't a specific student. I think as soon as you allowed them to take whatever seeds they were and reflect on it on their own lives, again, you don't know how that will shape moving forward, and maybe they'll revert back to ways, but you gave them something to think about themselves. And I think, yeah, it is so important, and I think everyone is navigating it in some way. So again, like we were saying, just being able to plant those seeds to see yourself in a different way, I think is, yeah, really transformative.
No, and that thank you so much, Aaron, for saying that, because I think one thing that when I was writing the book, and like I said, it's from all those experiences with you all in the classroom, and kind of very much reflecting on what Simon and Rachel have just said as well, is that not everybody wants to belong, but it's important as a teacher to feel brave enough to have that conversation, and also be okay with the answer. Like, it's not, because I think sometimes as teachers we can be really hard on ourselves to think, I've got to now create this classroom of inclusion, of equity, of belonging, and there's something for that I have to do. Like, it's almost like we almost, belonging becomes a bit of a fairy tale in some respects, when actually it's not, you want to undo the fairy tale, and kind of what I guess Disney's doing at the moment in many ways, with all, but it's almost like you want to be okay with a student saying, I don't like English, or I don't feel like I belong in your classroom, or I'm not coming to school to share all of this about my identity, but the person next to you might be. So, how do you then, in a classroom, create an environment that is compassionate, that has space for all of those voices and all of those types of learning? And the only way you can do that is by kind of exactly what you've been doing in your workshops, is by getting students to either write or speak, to express it, and making it feel safe for them to do that. And I thank you so much for your contribution so far, because I know that there are audience questions. So I'm going to pass back to Hannah.
Yes, so thank you. Brilliant discussion there. And I want to ask the first audience question back to you, Zahara. So, Zahara and I saw each other a few weeks ago. We were in London at the Anti Racism in the Curriculum Conference on the day Tommy Robinson was organising his supporters. And we really felt the tensions of that day. And Anika's question really speaks to that. How can we support students and staff creating a sense of belonging in the current environment when ethnic minority means we're having to defend the very fact that we do belong here in the UK? And then you've thought about this a lot, you've blogged about this a lot, Zahara. How do you want to respond to that, to Anika? It's such an important question.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that, Anika. I think the first thing, and I have been talking and reflecting about this a lot, particularly as I now have children at school, a child at school as well. I think it's really important to acknowledge it to begin with. So my concern is, in some respects, is that we support students by hiding what's happening, or we support students by saying, of course you belong, of course you're meant to be here, without the sort of what also comes with that sentence or that conversation, which is that, and there are a lot of people who are saying these, and you can, if you're okay to say it, these horrible, exclusionary, divisive things. And let's talk about why they're saying they're divisive, but only when you're comfortable doing that. And I think by you, I mean the students. So I think it's really important to acknowledge it with students. And I have to say, that's one thing that Aaron, I remember this conversation in particular, and it was there wasn't a similar, not a similar, well, yeah, a similar sort of incident. And it was I think it was Aaron actually who said, "Why don't you all just tell us the truth?" Like he was a student at the time, and he was like, "Why are the teachers not being truthful with us? Why are they not telling us what's actually happening?" So I think one way to support students is by validating how they're feeling and acknowledging that there are some really divisive, scary and dangerous things going on, and let's talk about it. Let's talk about how you're feeling, with respect for your feelings and an understanding this is a very vulnerable arena right now, and context that we're living through. And then also encouraging them to, I guess my go-to is always literature and books, because that would have been my classroom. And I've recently read this book called The Crossing. I think it's called, yeah, The Crossing or The Crossing. And it's all about migration. And I came, I don't know, I guess serendipity. I came across it in the library, hadn't heard of it before. And I read it and I just thought, this is the exact book that students right now in every classroom need to be reading. And if I was teaching again, particularly Key Stage 3, I would have totally brought that book in to the classroom, because it would have helped me have these conversations and support students, because again, it provides different perspectives. So that's how I would go on to support. Hannah, I don't know what you think, because
No, I love that. And Ruth put a really good reference in the chat about a reframe being about identity affirming classrooms as well, and thinking about what we're doing to affirm the diverse identities of the learners in our classroom, rather than what can sometimes be perceived as a deficit of creating a container or a mold and asking people to step into it, how we dismantle that. So another critic or critical theory theorist to think about there. So thank you, Zahara. You've got another question here from Nur. And before you all arrived, I was chatting to Zahara. Like, Zahara is an English teacher. She's a blogger. She speaks at events. She's got her own podcast. But I think actually writing the book is probably the most nerve-wracking thing she's done. And it feels the most vulnerable. And I know you're going to get this question from lots of people, Zahara. What advice would you give to aspiring authors and writers about finding your voice, finding your book, finding your publisher? And would you do anything differently if you were to write your book again? Two great questions.
Yeah, full disclosure, Noor is my sister, if that is.
I love that, Noor.
Thanks for joining, Noor. Thanks for asking a question. Why are you asking me a difficult question? We'll talk about that after the but no, I would say the first thing I would say, what advice would you give? Start writing. Like, I started blogging. Again, it was encouraged by my students. They all said to me, these are the conversations we should be having, which led to School Should Be becoming School Should Be. And I learned how to blog, and I just started writing. And it's really interesting when I look back at my earlier blogs, as an English teacher, I do critique I'm like, oh my God, like my expression makes me cringe. Or and this was before, like I started writing probably around 2015, 16, I think, was when I first started blogging. And I didn't know a lot about the online space. I barely knew what Grammarly was then. But just in terms of the practical side of things, I would say, just start writing about something that you're interested in, something that you just enjoy, like you're almost like a stream of consciousness. Would I do anything differently? I don't know. Holly's here. I don't know whether would I take.
This is a safe
like,
space.
Yeah. Writing the book was so challenging because I was in my head, a book, it's much longer than a blog. And I just felt when you become an author, you're seen as somebody who's got a credible voice. Whereas when you're a blog on the internet, as much as there are loads of books, but I just felt like with blogging, it just felt a lot more informal. And I don't know, it just didn't feel as much of a commitment as writing a book was. And I think the scariest thing for me about the book was that once it's in print, people could be reading it for months, years to come, and Amazon reviews could keep going and going and going. And what do you do if there's a negative review? Or what about if you write something that's printed and somebody disagrees? And I remember having those conversations, particularly in non-fiction book, because so much of it is based on experience. I think maybe what I would do differently is perhaps plan my time better around writing the book, which Hannah knows about as well, because there'll be times where I'm working with Hannah and she'll be like, where's that PowerPoint? I'm like, I'm doing it, it's ready, totally ready, coming your way. So definitely time blocking. So I definitely say just write about what interests you, and then time block to write a book.
Love it. I'm going to put the last two questions together and then we're going to wrap up. So you've got a question from Ruth. Do you have an idea for another book, your next book? Are you already thinking that one through? And then Anika's asked, like, what's your plan to go from here, your future plan? I don't think we've got long enough to talk about Zahara's career plans, but have you got an idea for another book and what's next for you, Zahara?
I think, I did say I'm never going to write another book again, but then I emailed Holly with a book idea a little while ago. So I don't know. I mean,
isn't that like giving birth? You kind of forget.
Done with the kids, no more kids. So yeah, but I do have an idea. I don't know. It's interesting with books. Like somebody asked me if I'd write fiction. I don't have the head for fiction, I don't think. But kind of an idea. Whether it will ever, I might just do a blog. Let's see what I have to. Yeah, for diverse ed. Future plans. I think I'd really like to again just explore that. The belonging has been such an interesting area of exploration for me. And I'd really like to work more within that equity space, particularly around I'd really like to link it more and work more along the lines of awarding gaps, thinking about like student retention in schools. Is belonging a way to keep, reduce the attendance gap and things like that. But yeah, that future plans at the moment are just to survive the kids, really, and just
and to enjoy the publicity that comes your way about the book as well. I was going to take us back in to round us out. So we've managed to achieve everything on what we planned to do. We've met Zahara, we've met the book and we've heard from her editor, we've met the brilliant panel and heard from the people who have supported and influenced Zahara along the way. If you've not yet bought the book, this is my plug, because Zahara will not ask you to buy the book. Please go and buy her book. And if you buy it from the Bloomsbury website, you get 25% off rather than buy it from Amazon. But if I could encourage you, if you have bought it or read it, please do review it. Okay, because reviews are how it helps other people find out about the book. So please do pop some lovely affirmations. She's had some brilliant reviews on Amazon already about the book, because that's how other people find out about it. And if you want to find out more about Zahara's book, she is going to be on the lineup for our World Book Day event. We host an event every March to celebrate all the educators in our network. So here she is with a host of other people who have published books in the last year. Going back to your call to action, Holly, we've been running this for 5 years to really encourage and also celebrate the people who are breaking out of some of the molds to find their voice and to publish their thinking as well. So just a final kind of thank you from everybody for joining tonight and supporting Zahara. And we do need to get a selfie, Zahara. So if anyone has got a copy of the book with them, if you could pop yourself on camera and hold your book up, we are going to do a selfie. If you haven't got a book, don't worry, but if you can turn your cameras on, that would be fabulous. And we'll just get a picture of everybody celebrating her. Where's my print screen? There we go. Okay, there we go. You can smile, you can do a wave, whatever you want to do. So 3, 2, 1, and we're going to capture Zahara's peer support group. Hang on 2 seconds. I need to do that silly copy thing. Here we go. Okay, amazing. Got it. Final words from you, Zahara, before everyone goes to put the kettle on.
I just want to say thank you so much for coming this evening. And Hannah, thank you so much to you for hosting this and encouraging me to actually celebrate the launch of the book. I really appreciate all of your support, and everyone like Rachel, Holly, Aaron, Simon. Thank you so much for being here and for talking about the book and belonging and saying some really nice things about me. I really appreciate it. I'll pay you all later. Thanks.
Love fest. Well done, Zahara. Look after yourself and the little ones, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye.